Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to the eighth episode of the Guyana Business Journal and Caribbean Policy Consortium's webinar series on transforming Guyana. I'm Terrence Blackman, Associate Professor of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College in the City University of New York and the founder of the Guyana Business Journal. And I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. David Lewis, of the Caribbean Policy Consortium and Manchester Trade Incorporated. Let me welcome everyone to the year 2023, and I trust that we will all have a prosperous and productive new year. As many of you know, this series brings together experts and prominent voices from Guyana and the Caribbean and the diaspora to discuss the impacts of Guyana's oil and gas development. We aim to offer a sort of nuanced look at the opportunities and the potential pitfalls ahead for Guyana. And we explore strategies to maximize the positive impacts of Guyana's oil revenues can have on Guyana's people, future, while mitigating the risks that other countries have faced, and to identify some of the more promising roles that the diaspora can play in this transition. Today, we want to examine investment security in Guyana, investment attraction and retention, the importance of regulations, the importance of protection, the importance of the business environment in Guyana. And we know that sort of countries use investment attraction and retention strategies to attract and retain foreign investment. And these strategies can include sort of tax incentives, the improving of the infrastructure, and creating favorable business environment. And our challenge for today, we want to ask our guest today, is to think about ways in which Guyana can better create a stable and supportive environment for business in order to continue to attract and retain foreign investment and expertise. Protecting investments, establishing clear regulations, as well as sort of improving the overall business climate. And we're joined by a wonderful cast of guests today. Kamal Samaru, the executive chairman of Demerara Distillers Limited. Floyd Haynes, the CEO of New Haven Merchant Bank, who's traveling with President Ali in India and hopefully will join us shortly. Scott McDonnell of the Caribbean Policy Consortium and the chief economist at Smith Research and Gradings. Patricia Francis, former JAMPRO president and executive director of the International Trade Center in Geneva. And Andrew Schnitzer de Silva from COO Sending, a workforce and technical training and procurement organization operating out of Mozambique. We are also, as I said earlier, joined by my colleague, Dr. David Lewis, my co-host, and I want to invite David at this moment to offer a few words of welcome, after which we will be joined by Kamal Samaru.
Good morning, Terrence and friends. Thank you so much. Those of you watching us in Guyana, the Caribbean, and internationally, it's a pleasure to start off the year with our Transforming Guyana series and a focus on investment, as various of our previous webinars have touched on the issue sporadically on how Guyana is performing, the business environment in the country. Of course, the great boom and traction with oil and energy, but also the importance of focusing on the non-oil and energy business sectors, investment and trade initiatives which are taking place in Guyana. And that's why we thought to have a good mix of people and not just focus on the oil and gas centrality in the country, despite its importance right now. In addition to that, I'd draw your attention, and you can visit our websites, both for the Guyana Business Journal and the Caribbean Policy Consortium. In December, right before the holidays, we were able to hold an in-person forum in Miramar, Florida, with Guyana diaspora, with experts from Guyana who visited at the private sector level and the government, precisely to discuss the new opportunities for Guyana in the future. And one of the key issues that came up was the importance of focusing beyond only oil and gas. So that's important. There's a centrality to that. It's what's providing a lot of the financial infrastructure and, of course, global marketing traction for Guyana and feeding a lot of ancillary sectors. But at the same time, we need to focus on the majority of the Guyanese economy in terms of the people and the businesses, which is the other sectors beyond oil and gas. So we'll be discussing some of those. And then finally, I always like to, make sure we keep in mind that it was only barely 3 to 4 decades ago that the notion of a free market economy and open economic reforms and an open trade and investment regime in Guyana was not a reality. After decades of a closed socialist type regime. So as we discuss this and as people tend to get impatient and critical with what's going on in Guyana, I like to remind people that this is still, relatively speaking, a new venture in Guyana, and we still have remnants of that vision of, the private sector. What role does it play? Do we want foreign investment? What do foreign companies do, and so on? And I think we've got an excellent group of people, Guyanese, Caribbean, American, international, that can weigh in on this and share inputs. And of course, with our audience in the electronic world, get the usual good feedback that we've had over these months. So Terence, thank you again. It's a great collaboration with GBJ, and let's get going.
Well, thank you, David. And I wanted to invite Kamal Samaru, the executive chairman of Demerara Distillers Limited, to kind of give us, from his perspective as one of the stronger companies, international companies within the context of Guyana, a kind of overview of sort of the broad challenges and opportunities as he sees it from DDL's perspective. Kamal, how is Guyana doing in terms of its efforts to create a stable and supportive environment for business? How is it doing from your perspective in terms of attracting and retaining foreign investment?
Yeah, thank you very much, and I appreciate the invitation to participate in this webinar. I thought that maybe if I spend a few moments giving a perspective of Guyana's economic evolution since independence in 1966, it will help to set the stage to better understand where Guyana is at this point in time and the opportunities for investment that exist in the country. I want to go back to when the country became independent in 1966 and basically trace what has happened over those 5 decades. In the first decade of post-independence, the country tried to come to grips with the fact that its major industries were owned by foreign multinationals, and so it embarked on a nationalization program, culminating in 1976 with the acquisition of the Booker's Group in Guyana. That's a group that I worked with at the time. The aim was to control the commanding heights of the economy so as to influence economic growth. And then the second decade of independence was spent with a series of state-owned businesses not being able to realize economic transformation. And the third decade was spent correcting that, embarking on an economic recovery program, structural adjustment program with the IMF, contracting out the management of sugar, liberalizing trade and currency and stuff like that. So during that period, the Guyana moved from 3 to 1 US to 200 to 1. And then the fourth period, fourth decade after independence, by that time, trade liberalization around the world, following the signing of the WTO agreement in Marrakesh in 1994, all the preferences that we had for sugar, rice, rum, and so on in Europe were disappearing, and the country was heading for very difficult times. And then the financial crisis came in 2007, and the price of gold shot up, and so to beyond $2,000 a ton. And so gold moved from being just generating $100 million to $800 million by the end of that fifth decade. And then that took us into the sixth decade when oil was discovered in 2015. And this is where we are at this point in time. So there are four situations that is setting the stage for investment in Guyana. First of all, the fact that over those first 5 decades of independence, Guyana has not been able to generate enough resources to build a competitive infrastructure. So that need still exists. And I know that the government has set out policies of rebuilding the infrastructure in a massive way and also invest in a gas to shore project to bring the cost of electricity down by 50%. So that's the first thing that is happening, catching up in time as a result of the revenues generated from oil. The second situation that is providing the opportunity for investment is the need to build the service sector to support the oil and gas industry. And this is a whole new area of business, and the government has passed local content legislation to make sure that local businesses can partner and work with other companies overseas to support that sector. The third situation that is creating investment opportunity is as a result of the COVID crisis, we've now realized as a region how vulnerable we are. And so the heads of government are saying, we need to get on with regional food security. So they've set a goal of reducing the imports by 25% by 2025. So that's the third situation that opens up opportunity for investment. And then finally, with what is happening in the world, with a move from outsourcing to more near sourcing and onshoring and friend sourcing and so on, I think being part of this hemisphere also presents new opportunities for investment again. So those are the four scenarios that I believe presents very, very numerous opportunities for investment in Guyana.
Well, thank you. So do you want to talk a bit more about the way in which kind of the near sourcing is kind of added some, how does the near sourcing work from the DDL perspective? I mean, one of the issues that we noted in was the kind of crowding out of sort of the sort of creation of shortages in the labor supply in terms of being able to hire people locally, given the competition between foreign firms and local firms, and some of these kind of nuances which have emerged in the context of challenges, so to speak, of the foreign investment in Guyana. How is that being perceived on the ground? Is it as challenging as we read in the sort of newspapers?
Right. Okay. So, because we did not have a competitive environment, local production became a challenge. We could not compete against imports coming in. The cost of power, the shortage of skills, and the lack of capital. I believe that with the situation where power cost is going to come down, where there's infrastructure is being put in place, and where there's more availability of capital, I think companies are looking to invest in areas that result in products that previously were imported can be available locally. For example, I can give you one example. At the moment, milk for the Guyana market is imported from New Zealand. And DDL is embarking on the investment in a dairy project that is intended to produce milk from a dairy farm that would meet the needs of the domestic market initially in the short term, We're partnering with an Israeli company in that regard. And in another month or so, we'll be signing a joint venture agreement. This is the kind of investment that is taking place. Where previously items that were imported are now being available locally. I can also say that DDL has embarked on a major fruit processing operation where fruits are cultivated locally by farmers and it's processed in a food processing plant, extracting pulp that is used to make juices. Um, so prior to now, juices were imported. Right? And then if you wanted to produce juice, there was pulp that was imported. So we are moving to a stage where from the agriculture base, we are producing items that go into the processing and up to the consumer level, replacing imports. I believe also that as we build those industries, we will meet not only the Guyana requirements, but I believe under the regime of regional food security, there will be CARICOM market opportunities available.
Thank you. It's precisely on that note that I wanted to bring Patricia Francis in. The regional opportunities. How do you see it from your perspective? You're muted, Patricia.
Not yet.
Good. Very much, and thank you, Terence and David, for inviting me here. Certainly, with respect to the regional opportunities, I think this is probably one of the most important of this opportunity of Guyana, because I think Guyana, it's a very small population, cannot actually grow industry on a global basis unless they somehow integrate into the region. And by that, I don't only mean CARICOM, I also mean South America. Because as things begin to transform and move, there is going to be need for industry that Kamal just spoke about. Can it live on 800,000 people, or does it need to expand into other markets? Same thing with the juice industry, etc. Setting the economy off on a footing where it is not thinking globally from the very start, to be I think another short-lived strategy. The Guyanese government has recognized this, and so some of the things that it is in place with respect to the attraction of foreign direct investment, whether it's in agriculture, light manufacturing, etc., recognizes that we ought not to discriminate against foreign investment, that we should target it and make sure that it is going in the direction that we need to have. Now, one of the points that brought up was the issue of infrastructure. And any of these industries that you're talking about, whether you're talking about the agro industry or you're talking services, the infrastructure to support those and the kind of ecosystem on which you build those industries is going to be critical and important. So once you start talking about producing for a global market, you've got to think about, well, how am I going to move those goods? How am I going to move those goods, whether by sea or by air? And currently, the air and sea infrastructure of Guyana is not in a state where one could really ensure. In addition to that, if we're also thinking about going global in say an agro industry, one would also have to have the mechanism around that which support those industries from the point of view of certification. So do you have the certification in place to ensure that those dairy products can go into any market? and so you're then also now about both government and private sector infrastructure in supporting those industries to make sure that you really do have a seamless supply chain to be able to take it where you need to go. So I think also, again, the Local Content Act recognizes this to a large extent. And I'm not speak about, the percentages and so forth, but I think the government has certainly seen that this is going to be a moving target as they build capacities, both human, physical, and also institutional, in order to industries as they move forward. And this is a really complex business. And I can recall when I was invited by the leader of Dubai to an investment conference in the year 2000. And when I went there, and I don't know how many of you have been to Dubai, but the only thing that, building there was a Hyatt hotel where this conference was taking place, and there was very little else there. And the ruler spoke about his vision of what he thought was important in order to be able to actually move the industry, the country forward. And when I saw that, I said to myself, he spoke about a healthcare city, a media city, and a sophisticated service economy. So that I left that conference thinking to myself, who would actually want to come and live in it has nothing. But he invited me back 2 years later, and when I visited, Burj Khalifa was already built, the media city was established, and Jebel Ali was already a logistics facility. But His Highness had hired the best in the world to advise him, his government, and therefore there is much that we can learn from both their success and failure in how that transformation took place. So, you have Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean has a huge diaspora with qualifications, with history, with this is going to be a critical linchpin, because to transform from where you are today to where you need to be. I mean, I've read the vision statements. To make a huge leap is going to require the importation of human resources in order to make the systems work. And it is not going to be something which is simple and easy to implement. And of course, importantly in all of this is the protection and regulations that are going to be put in place. Now, I sit currently as the chair of the Trades Facilitation Task Force in Jamaica. And this is something that was set up in 2015 after we ratified the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. And I can promise you that the challenge that I have faced in trying to modernize the various border agencies has been horrendous. Of course, COVID interrupted it to a large extent. But it's not something to be sneezed at when one is looking at that transformation. And also, I can also think back to my days at Jampro, where significant investment, more than $1 billion a year, similar to what in Guyana now. And that approval and regulatory process one had to go through. The system was not accustomed to the kind of throughput that you're talking about. And we had to put a special mechanism in place in order to manage it so that it didn't become complete bottleneck and nightmare. Those kinds of things are really critical. It's a lot of moving parts need to be put in place in order to be able to make the system work. I mean, I can go on and more about those kinds of things, but let me come back to you, and then we can talk business environment and also the very important low carbon initiative which the government is pushing, which I think is critical and important. but which also has, things that one would need to do in order to make it actually works.
Thank you, and actually that gives me a really nice segue into Scott. Scott, I wanted you to give us a kind of global sense. Patricia's kind of given us a kind of regional sense, and has hinted at some of the connections to the broad sort of global context in which we're operating. And so my question is, what does Guyana have to? Does Guyana want to be Dubai, or should we be something else? And where's, given your sort of understanding of the global context, where do we target? Or where ought we to be targeting, and how ought we to be developing the kinds of systems that will accommodate the throughput that Patricia just talked about?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Terrence and David, for having me on board. Kamal and Patricia, I greatly enjoyed your presentations. It gave quite a lot of overview from the Guyanese perspective, and Patricia in particular, the granularity of some of the issues. My approach is a little bit different in that I'm kind of looking at Guyana from 30,000 feet up. How does Guyana stack up? How competitive is Guyana in that regard? First and foremost, economic growth has been out of the ballpark. I mean, the recent headline I came across is, and I'm not saying there's no problems here, I want to make sure that's fully understood, but this is a headline that came out of the press: booming Guyana, only country in the region to record double-digit growth in 2023 World Bank report. And this comes in a real contrast to the rest of the developing world and also advanced economies. I mean, to quote, this is the World Bank's, I won't say uplifting report. The World Bank has forecast that global growth is slowing sharply in the face of elevated inflation, higher interest rates, reduced investment, I'm stressing that for a reason, and disruptions caused by Russia's invasion of Europe. Indeed, the global economy is supposed to slow, I think, to 1.7% this year, and it's supposed to go up a bit next year to 2.7, but that's a real slowdown. Emerging markets in particular have been hit very hard. Issues such as high debt, poverty, worsening of poverty, depleting of educational services in a lot of countries. And while Guyana has done, while a lot of other countries are struggling, Guyana is moving in the right direction. Guyana is transforming, and transformation is not an easy process, to which I think both Kamal and Patricia alluded to. But take a look at the foreign investment going into Guyana, and this is something that is quite critical. In 2020, it was $2.06 billion. In 2021, it was $4.55 billion. And in this year, it looks like that trend is going to continue. Now, while a lot of this is going into the oil industry, it is also going into non-oil sectors. I think the number that ECLA had was $180 million, one of which was a Jamaican telecommunications program, also upgrade of infrastructure. So, I mean, Guyana is definitely on the map for foreign investment. It is attracting it within Latin America. And we're talking about a country with less than 1 million people. Guyana came in 7th in 2021 in terms of foreign investment. That is, behind Brazil, which led Mexico, Chile, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, and then there's Guyana. So for a small country on the shoulder of South America, Guyana in many regards is punching above its weight. Which leads me to the next point. It's key to have awareness of what's going on in the global economy, where you are. In other words, to put it mildly, don't get cocky, Guyana. You've had a lot of success. You've moved ahead. You're transforming the economy. You're getting a socioeconomic facelift, but don't get cocky about it, because we live in a very competitive world. A number of things that come up that catch my attention. One is as we're doing the great energy shift globally, okay? Guyana has, we're talking oil and gas. Patricia mentioned the carbon issue. It's critical Guyana moves to develop non-fossil fuel sectors. I mean, it goes from small, medium-sized enterprises, offshore office centers, BPOs, the whole range of industry. And Kamal's company, of course, has got a global footprint, but there's no reason why Guyanese companies can't issue forth from Guyana. And Patricia mentioned the Caribbean, the regional aspect of it, not just the Caribbean, but South America, but also North America. The other factor that one of the concerns I think Guyana should have, and is the issue of there's other gold rushes going on. If anybody is following the green transition, the push to EVs, wind and solar power, you don't get these things by going hocus pocus, here it is. They have to have raw materials. And right now there's a boom going on for lithium, cobalt, copper, nickel, rare earths. Guyana has a mining sector. Was it Xinjiang Mining Company, a Chinese company, recently bought in? They're very active in lithium in Argentina. Hopefully they're looking for lithium development in Guyana. So, I mean, and you take a look at the foreign direct investment numbers and countries, Argentina has sucked in a lot of money recently on lithium. They have Ganfeng, which is the largest lithium company in the world, Chinese. Canada's Neolithium's gone in, Xinjiang's gone in. You have countries like Chile. You've got a huge amount of investment going into electricity deals, but what's driving it? Renewables, renewable energies. ECLA said in the report, and this comes out of Deloitte Touche actually, about Chile, in an area in which more investments are expected in coming years, renewables are going to be a driver. And that's something Guyana has to keep an eye on. Colombia is another one. Renewables are among the top 3 areas of foreign investment in the country. So that's a big deal. But it's not just the neighborhood. If you look at Zambia, you look further afield, like Democratic Republic of Congo, they're all competing now for that investment. Okay. Why Congo? Well, they leading producer of cobalt. They have nickel. Certainly Zambia has copper, but it's a competitive game, which takes me to the last point, and that's where does Guyana want to go to retain and attract its new investment? And where it wants to go is to Denmark. And why do I say Denmark? I know it sounds like a very odd thing. Going to Denmark is a reference from Francis Fukuyama, who was in the State Department and wrote a book called The End of History, which proved to be erroneous, but he did get the idea of going to Denmark, which was, in his mind, a mythical place that is known to have good political and economic institutions. It is stable, democratic, peaceful, prosperous, inclusive, and has extremely low levels of political corruption. I think that's where Guyana wants to go. Does it want to be Dubai? Dubai is attractive. Does it want to be like Singapore? Singapore is attractive. And gosh, if I'm correct, Singapore is one of the biggest investors now in Guyana. So there's definitely some attractiveness into getting to it. Not to repeat what Patricia and Kamal said, but I mean, there's a shopping list that goes with the vision thing for Guyana, and that is the policy mix of improving education, development of human capital is critical, and these other countries they're also competing in that regard. Diversification from non-oil sectors, promotion of foreign direct investment, but also promotion of local investment. We want to see a more competitive private sector in Guyana, and I think that's very critical. Tapping the diaspora. Jamaica has done a phenomenal job in North America, selling everything from hot sauces to pillows, soap. They've got grocery store chains. Jamaica's done a great job. There's no reason Guyana can't follow in that same track and tap into the Guyanese diaspora. Upgrade of infrastructure. Kamal, I think, mentioned electricity, but there's other areas also. The low carbon effort has to be worked on. Improving government transparency and disclosure. Guyana needs to work on its standing with Transparency International. In a world where investors look at GSE, governance, social, sorry, I screwed that up. ESG, there we go. Environment, social, and governance issues. People look at Transparency International. They're trying to figure out, if I invest in this country, are my shareholders going to have a rebellion against me later? And that becomes important. Now, in Transparency International's 2022 corruption index, number one was Denmark. Okay. Guyana was 87th. It's the same peer group as Suriname, Morocco, Colombia, and Vietnam. It's improved from where it stood in the past. It did a very good thing in establishing a local office of Transparency International, but there's work that's got to be done in that too. To close out, because I know I'm running against my time here, Guyana's transformation is definitely in motion. It has critical momentum, but the trick going forward is, how do you keep the momentum going? How do you keep those reforms going? And how do you maintain the consensus in Guyanese society that this is the vision of where we want to go? I think the prospects are very good for Guyana, but there's a lot of challenges that sit here.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's indeed the case. I think we're either aiming at Dubai or we're thinking Denmark. And so,
well, Francis, Patricia brought, Dubai. I haven't been to Dubai,
please, I didn't mean to say that Guyana should ape Dubai. Not. I was talking about the rate at which it transformed and how they did it.
Yeah.
So it's please, we would not want Dubai in Guyana.
No, but it is impressive what Dubai did.
Yes.
And if you look at some other small economies, Singapore's a good example, Taiwan to some degree, Hong Kong in the past. Small countries can do a lot of things. And if you want to go back historically, look at the Italian city-states, Venice and Genoa and Florence. So it can be done, but it's critical things are developed, infrastructure and human capital in particular. And I think that is really the pivot now for where Guyana goes, because the money is coming in. How do you use it? And how do you get the best out of that for the rest of the country, for everybody?
Yeah, that's a good place to bring you into the conversation. And so, as someone who, is in these sort of gold rush parts of the world, who has done this sort of work, I know you're Mozambique and Zimbabwe, and Scott just talked about Zambia. From your perspective, and that is part of the thinking. Give us a perspective on Guyana as someone who has actually been involved in these various places where they have been these gold rushes, so to speak, and speak to how you see them evolving and what are some of the critical issues that you've identified in your business practice in this regard.
Well, first of all, Terence, and thank you for having me and for hosting me again. And thank you to Kamal, Patricia, and Scott for your very interesting interventions. Yeah, after Scott went 30,000 feet up, I'm probably coming back down to the ground now. And yeah, to talk a little bit about my experience, it was interesting that Kamal gave us a historical run up to where we are today. And in my experience in other countries that have undergone quick transformations or that were fueled by oil discoveries, it is important to know where they were before those discoveries happened and how they were able to transform themselves with those discoveries. And what I see happening in Guyana is in a way much different from what I saw happening in the beginning of the century in Angola and what I am experiencing right now in Mozambique. There is willingness to transform, to create better ways to attract investors, but at the same time, I feel that on the ground there is still a lack of understanding of the huge impact that that this discovery can entail, and so there is still not a clear understanding of all the requirements and of all the efforts that need to be made in order to attract foreign investment. We spoke about Dubai, and we spoke about going to Denmark, and I think those two ideas are ideas that could have some maturing, in the sense where using the Dubai example, there was a total openness towards foreign investment. There was a total release of governance and of ease of attracting foreign investment, and that still I fail to see on the day-to-day life for a foreign investor entering into Guyana. Bureaucracy is still a major hurdle. There is some sense of fear, maybe, that the foreign investors are going to keep the whole gold in the gold rush. And so there is also, on behalf of the Guyanese Economic Society, there is still some wariness into how to accept and to how to collaborate with foreign investors coming in. And it is difficult to penetrate. And I think that happens naturally, and also, as Kamal explained, historically, there is a reason why Guyana is a more closed society. But I think that if the Guyanese economy understands the hugeness of this opportunity, that collaborating with companies and with foreign investors that have gone through these processes before will actually be an accelerator to create a Dubai state, or to create the type of development that Guyana needs. Patricia spoke about not only CARICOM but the whole of South America. Sometimes I question myself if because I hear on the ground that a Guyanese company or Guyanese local the local content laws, they are somewhat looking only at Guyanese companies and not at all the CARICOM states, when Guyana should be attracting these other states to help them, because Guyana does have a small population, does have a huge task ahead of itself, and it could profit a lot from creating collaborative ways of investing in developing its infrastructure, in developing its resources, and in looking at digging up the gold a lot quicker than it will be able to do by wanting to do it all by itself. Having said that, I don't want to sound like this is a complaint. I think it is a more than natural weariness. I saw it in Angola. I saw the way when all the international oil companies were coming into Angola, how the Angolans were very wary how that process did take some years until there started being a back and forth between the local companies and the international companies. I see it happening, repeating itself in Mozambique. So it is not something that is unique to Guyana. And I do believe that it is not something that will be permanent in Guyana. I think it is part, well, these series are called Transforming Guyana. So I think it is part of a transformational process that the Guyanese Economic Society goes through this. So there will be a first stage of some wariness. There will be a first stage of fear, and once the economy does start opening up and there starts more interaction between international companies and local companies, I believe that will slowly fade away, and then the transformation will tend to pick up and happen in a much faster paced environment than it will in these initial stages. So that is a little bit of what I feel, and that is why us also as a company, we are I've learned in my over 20 years never to be in a hurry. So I look at Guyana and I look at what is happening, and I am in no ways in a hurry to get everything done. And that, I think, is a lesson that one needs to learn when one is doing business in a new country, in a new environment. And patience is definitely a virtue. And it is interesting to see how slowly at first, but then it'll be quicker, how the economic environment changes, and how people's mindsets change towards this type of foreign investment.
Well, thank you. And David, part of, you just hit on something that has been part of the rationale for our sort of series, in a sense, is to say, here's what we know happened around the world, and here are some of the structural features. You just mentioned the structural feature in Angola, in Mozambique, of a certain, wariness to engage, collaborate with, a certain insularity, looking inward, trying to take care of me first, not understanding that the end result might be that if you're in Dubai and you kind of let go of the controls a bit more, that it is more likely that you reap a sort of larger reward in this context. So that's part of what we've been trying to do. Help me to better contextualize this, David. Given what you've heard, help me to better better frame this discussion that has been emerging.
Thank you all. We've had a lot of richness in the discussion and the commentary. A couple of housekeeping issues. Did we lose Patricia?
No, she's still here.
Okay, good, because I wasn't seeing. And then secondly, I've shared with you some emails, some people with some login problems. I'm not sure if somebody on staff can check that. I sent you a couple of emails regarding that. But I think one of the key things is, and Andrew just hit it on, saying, not to be in a hurry. This is still a work in progress. And I'm glad Kamal started with the background and the history, because there is a danger and a risk seeing all these headlines about the economic boom, the only country in the Americas with positive GDP growth every other week. I mean, the numbers are just baffling. I think the last one is $12.5 billion of a new investment discovery. Well, guess what? It takes years and decades for that to trickle down and have the impact. So there's that risk and that danger that all this focus on the oil and gas, crowds out the reality of the need to do the basic day-to-day homework of modernizing the economy, of streamlining bureaucratic and regulatory procedures, as has been mentioned, and really, get beyond and overcome still what I would call hangover of the 60s and 70s and that state control period that Kamal mentioned, the nationalizations, the view that there's nothing good about what has been the experience of Guyana with foreign investors. It's bookers, it's the sugar estates, it's indentured labor, it's slavery, and so on. And I think, that is still a work in progress. And to the degree that we can begin to focus more on some of these new success stories beyond oil and gas, the new initiative, people now, people think Demerara is just a rum company. Boop, no, you failed. You're wrong. Kamal can give us the figures. It used to be 100% alcohol. That's not the case anymore. They've been transforming. We're now seeing new technology initiatives in Guyana. There's need to see how can we leverage new technologies, not just the call centers and BPOs, but using new technologies for new business and new initiatives. So I think that's important, because otherwise, I think we give the government and the private sector then a raw deal in terms of what they are doing, because the expectations are so much and the work is still needed. As Scott mentioned, yes, the corruption perception index with Transparency International is 87 out of 180. The competitiveness index out of the World Economic Forum, Guyana is 121 out of 140. So it's still a lot of work to do there. The World Bank Doing Business report, despite the growth over the years and the excellent work that Go Invest has been doing, it's 134 out of 190. So there's still work to be done, and we need to help focus on that in terms of, how to get that being looked at, and not just the part with regards to oil and gas. I'd like to also harp on one issue. In our years, working decades since the Caribbean Basin Initiative with investment promotion in the region and so on, we always used to tease, yes, it's important what we're doing with foreign investors and so on, but can you tell me, how are you treating local investors? And we always talk, Patricia knows this from her work in Geneva, national treatment is a great phrase in all these agreements and so on. And so many times we would work in countries where people would say, yes, locals, and we have to be careful with foreign investors, but you know what? National treatment, I don't want national treatment, because national treatment has been so bad in so many countries that, no, I don't want national treatment. Give me that treatment you're trying to give the foreign investors. So that's work in progress in Guyana. I think it's also the challenge, because we are now seeing, and I think Kamal can attest to this, because Demerara has produced a lot of this, the new generation of new companies which are growing out of that old tradition of, natural resources, mining, and so on. And it's important that we look to ways to nurture them and how they fit into this boom. Because as Scott mentioned from the numbers, and he makes a living on this, you could be having a nice boom day and you wake up next week and the boom can be gone. So we really need to be careful on that. That don't be cocky is important, but I think it needs to be qualified with don't be cocky, and let's make sure we start focusing on what are some of the other sectors, what are some of the local initiatives, and how can we support that. I'm sorry Floyd could not join us. I know he's in India, but I did have one issue on that, and Kamal mentioned it, everything having to do with the financing need, the capital need, which is throughout the Caribbean. I've always argued our problem is not that there is no money. The Caribbean is a very wealthy region in terms of capital. The problem is the institutions that manage those monies are very risk averse and are very negative with regards to working with local businesses. So I think Floyd's new initiative with the New Haven Merchant Bank and some new ones that are developing in Guyana are going to be critical in terms of the support structure for new companies, new initiatives, local investors, because at the end of the day, most foreign investors, we come in with the money, with the whole thing, with everything. We don't need to go and knock on Guyana Bank of Trade and Industry and say, oh, I'm going to need an extra $500 million for this. But it's the local part that we need to emphasize and make sure that they can get the same benefits and the same opportunities that foreign investors are getting. So I think those are some of the key issues. Scott has mentioned it, and I think if we could get some feedback, Jamaica has been a good example to look at in many areas, but we also know Jamaica has had some trouble in some areas. And one of the things that we're pushing more as a company working in Guyana is look at the neighborhood experience, learn the best practices, but also when we fell down and how they got back up, whether it's Trinidad because of oil, whether it's Jamaica because starting with export growth since the 1950s, new services initiatives in countries like Barbados. There's a lot going on. And then, of course, Guyana has that wonderful advantage, which it's a South American country. There's Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, all these countries where there's a lot of experience. And over the years, my first visit to Guyana was 1982. It's amazing how you now go back and there's now all these niches of Brazilians, Venezuelans, Colombians. The Mexicans are all over Guyana as well. So there's a learning curve, there's an experience there that I think can be taken advantage of, both at the government, but most importantly at the private sector level. Last but not least, because I know audience will mention it, this goes beyond government and the private sector. We need to do more to integrate civil society, academia, media. I know the University of Guyana is doing a lot to push STEM, to push training in many of these new areas. I think that's a critical area. We are now looking at new alliances with universities from all over. How can they support the University of Guyana initiative? Because that infrastructure support is also necessary. There's no reason why in 10 years, Guyana could not become a haven for offshore education linked up with universities from all over the world. But again, you need to have that focus and you need to be open to that opportunity. Thank you, Terence. Let me stop there.
Thank you, David. And in a way, you mentioned Patricia, and in a sense, I wanted to direct the sort of first question from the audience to her. So, David Modeste is sort of thanks the panelists for the remarks, and this goes to the question that David just had. He says, investment opportunities and their sustainability depend to a large extent on political and social stability. And the question is, speak to what Guyana must do to ensure that these investment opportunities, what are the three non-negotiables? And I wanted to say, given Jamaica's prominence in terms of its ability to be, from a Caribbean perspective, in a sense, a proper innovative capitalist society. Not perfect, but relative to her neighbors. What are the non-negotiables for Guyana, as you see from your perspective, first from Geneva, and then from your perspective in Jamaica?
Thank you very much. That's a tough question. The Guyanese society has been harmonious in terms of its racial integration. That's a major difference between Guyana and say Guyana and maybe even Trinidad, Jamaica. So Jamaica has a racially integrated society, which is important in terms of the political balance. And even if you look globally at what works and where societies have some kind of common platform and common beliefs, values system that they support, easier to have a democratic system that works. and that you have the play between governments, etc., where you can go in and out of government. But I think in all of that, there is a needs to be a recognition of self. What is self, and value of self, and it has embraced its culture, it has embraced its diversity, and that diversity has come innovation, and that innovation has impacted our creative industries in the same way that it has in Trinidad, in the same way that it has in rest of the Caribbean, but probably more successfully than others. And success, I believe, has to do with some mistakes that we made in the past. So our collapse of our financial services sector certainly taught us the need for regulation, because we had a system where we divested our financial services sector, and in that business, we did not have the infrastructure in place to support a diversified and privatized financial services sector, and therefore the misbehavior happened, and we had learning from that exercise. It was very important that whatever we do, we need to have the regulatory framework in place in order to make industry functions. So for the creative industries, for example, having the whole for intellectual property rights, having the infrastructure for developing an industry which is based on intellectual property, it's critical that whole ecosystem lives there to support that industry. So the non-sexy part of government is critical to the success of any kind of industry, and you have to do those bits and pieces which nobody likes to do, and which are very important to the success of any industry. So I looked and read with the development, the low carbon development plan and that is probably the opposite of a Dubai, but it is absolutely the most wonderful opportunity to transform a country within the context of sustainable development, but it's going to require a different kind of understanding of your people as to what this actually means in my life going forward, the opportunities going forward, and how therefore the context of foreign investment and partnerships can happen in order to make that go forward. So the Hess agreement, for example, I know that there's some criticisms about it, but the fact is that we have this as a first example of a partnership which is going to put resources in the hands of the government in order for some of this transformation take place. Now, what is the public's understanding of what this means? I mean, do they understand what that means in terms of environmental protection? And is the judiciary, who is responsible for adjudicating, do they understand the consequences of not having the right kind of decisions when a case comes in front of them? So this transformation process, this innovation, this involves a whole education system of the people understand what that means, what the value is going to be for them for putting something in place, and at the end of the day, how am I going to protect it? How am I going to ensure that it works for everyone? And there is a lot to be said. Readiness of the Guyanese environment in order to accept what's going to happen or what should happen. And I could go on and on, but I think I've run on too long.
No, you've hit on a very important point, and I want to throw this to you, Kamal Samaru. You know, two things. One that comes up quite frequently in conversations that I've had with folks goes to this issue of intellectual property and the protection of intellectual property. The respecting of contracts. This comes up. So I wanted you to kind of do a little on this, but also to kind of make the broader case. As Patricia, what's the value proposition for Guyanese in this larger sort of world to be a bit more free, to be a bit more open, to have a regulatory environment that is robust, to this kind of thing. What's the value proposition as you see it from your perch in industry in Guyana?
Okay, thank you. I will come specifically to that, but I wish to cover a few other points. The same complaint we talk about the bureaucracy that international investor might feel it's holding up their investment. Local companies also complain about the bureaucracy because the government bureaucracy was never developed for this environment. It is new. The time it takes to process applications through various agencies, it's a bureaucracy that is designed to control, and they take that very, very seriously. So there's been announcements by the government that they are looking at digitizing government to reduce the dependence on the discretion of a government officer in an interface with an applicant. So there is a modernization process that has started in the way governments operate. And these things take time. It will not happen overnight. So the one point I want to make is that I have complaints about the way the bureaucracy deals with the many things that I have to interact with it, just as anybody else. So that's the one point I want to make. Second point I want to make is that as we expand and we in new areas and we look at targeting markets around the world, the question of transportation infrastructure, do we have it? Well, even as we are building productive capacity, there is investments going into deep water harbor, airport expansion, all sorts of logistics infrastructure that is designed to make the entire system more competitive and more effective. The third point I want to talk about is about power. While we're doing a gas to shore project, the government has said that the hydroelectric power is still on the table. The remote cities are being powered by solar energy at an increasing pace. So there is a mix of power that is taking place. And so those things are addressed. And from the judiciary point of view, the Caribbean Court of Appeal is the final court in the Guyana jurisdiction system. So there are regulations that deals with intellectual property and trademarks. We under our agreements with our international partners, we have to respect their intellectual property. And in the judicial system, if one is unhappy with a local ruling, they can go to the Caribbean Court of Appeal and get redress on any matters that are not satisfactorily addressed within the domestic system. So I believe that we are going through in the last 5-6 years, we are going through changes to systems and structures that has been institutionalized over the last 50 years, geared and oriented towards a very different dispensation. And it will take time to change these, but my assessment is that there's a willingness on the part of government to do this. And I believe that the population is responding positively in many respects. You know, we have had it's been said that 90% of the people with tertiary education in Guyana migrate. We have more Guyanese living outside of Guyana than inside. And so the local population, through their relationship, have a pretty good understanding of the way the developed societies operate. And I believe as changes and laws are put in place, I believe the population will respond very positively to the many changes that are taking place, albeit too slowly for all of us, but it is a society that is going through change at a phenomenal rate.
Thank you. So Scott, I wanted to bring you in here to offer a thought. So Kamal just noted kind of the speed at which things are happening, and the insisting on the importance of us to be a bit patient with what is emerging in Guyana, and Patricia sort of spoke in a sense to some of, as from the Jamaica experience, some of the non-negotiables. From your perspective, what are some, as you see it, some of the non-negotiables for Guyana as it moves in this development trajectory?
I would say there are 5 things. And first, Patricia had the experience with Dubai. I had the experience with Incheon, the development of Korea's biggest airport, and it took place in the 1990s. And the initial idea was we want to move the congestion away from Seoul, move it to Incheon, which is also a port. It's also famous where General MacArthur landed during the Korean War. But the thing about Incheon was this was a vision thing. And the 5 things that I got out of that experience, some of which have application for Guyana, is one, there was a sense of mission that this is going to improve Korea. It's going to have a benefit for everybody. It's going to attract more foreign investment, but it also makes Korea more of a regional hub because you could reach China, Japan, the rest of Asia easier. So and key to that was the concept of building a national consensus. Patricia kind of alluded to it, but that's very important to make this work, especially in a multi-ethnic country like Guyana. At the end of the day, I think most people say, what's in it for me? And I think if everybody in Guyana feels that way, these reforms, this transformation gets easier. The second thing I think is non-negotiable is the development of human capital. We've belabored the point here, but that's key. And all those people outside of Guyana, well-educated, entrepreneurial, it'd be really great to see some of that come back into the country. Building infrastructure, Incheon built the infrastructure. They didn't have it, but they gave a time frame to build the infrastructure, and they hit the targets on the time frame. So if you're an outside investor and you're looking at a project, Kamal says he's going to have the bridge done in a year. After that is the extension road, and he hits those targets. I want to invest in Kamal because he's successful. He's meeting the targets. So that's important. And I would say the other thing that really comes up, and this was a big thing with Incheon, Koreans speak more English, but at the time, Koreans basically speak Korean. It was not as internationalized as it is today, but the effort was made explicit that we want to make Incheon and its surroundings a nice place to live. And that dealt with everything between public facilities, parks, swimming pools, to law and order. And I think this is one of the issues where Guyana, it's a point of sensitivity. Law and order is a challenge. So I would say those items really sit there as being quite important. I'd just like to add one thing, if I may, and in terms of the financing of all this, and it has not been brought up by anybody, but it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, and that is the Guyanese stock market. It is underutilized for where Guyana wants to go. I think there's less than 20 companies listed. It meets once a week, I think, every Monday or Tuesday. If you're going to really establish yourself and you're bringing in all the other sophistication, then you've got eventually that is an area that can be tapped by local people, foreigners. It can be tapped by the diaspora. Lebanon, for all of its problems, has always relied on its diaspora to do bond issues, to put money into the Beirut Stock Exchange. It has provided a lifeline. Guyana doesn't need a lifeline, but it needs that investment flow, and the stock market there is just something which it's just kind of sitting there. And I don't mean that as an insult to the people that work there, but it's something that could be further developed, and it can be developed on a pan CARICOM approach or whatever, but it needs to be tapped.
I want to say, if I may, that I fully support that point. I have made the point that there is need to look at our stock exchange regulation because a huge opportunity is being missed. I'm aware of various funds, the pension funds and various other institutions have significant resources available for investment. And because the structure is not in place and new companies are not being listed, I believe it's a missed opportunity. But I do believe that there are some experiences in CARICOM, particularly Jamaica, is being looked at, and Jamaica's experience with the junior stock market. And I've seen that the Private Sector Commission is having a session and somebody to talk about that. So we are drawing on the experience of the region because I believe that is a huge opportunity to mobilize resources that are readily available to channel into some of the investment that the country needs. So I fully support Scott on that point.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you. So Andrew, so the question is broadly the non-negotiables. From your perspective, what are three non-negotiables as you see this transformation occurring?
Well, I'd like to pick up where Scott dropped off, and I do think that that is definitely on his list of five. That Guyana becomes a nice place, an attractive place to be, and I would like to use that in its broader sense. So yes, obviously a nice place. Obviously the infrastructure has to be there, but the general day-to-day living and the way you go about doing business, it has to be alleviated, the bureaucratic load, and I think that is a non-negotiable. There has to be what Kamal was talking about, the digitalization of the bureaucracy. So a bureaucratic reform is important, is very important.
Yes.
The infrastructures and
just as a point of, this one has some resonance. You might note the comment that came in earlier, which someone who noted that tried to start a business and spent 3 hours in the line at a bank for a new account, then told they needed to apply online, had to wait for an appointment, and it took them 2 months to open a business. So I think your point has resonance in terms of what has been coming in terms of the messages that folks have. So sorry to cut you, but I just wanted to amplify that. Yes.
I can tell you, I closed myself inside the bank after closing hours and refused to leave, waiting for someone to bring me my one file that was missing, and that's how I got my bank account open. So yes, I have lived it in person, those struggles. So I think that is really important, that there is a digitalization, bureaucratic reform, call it what you will. The infrastructures are fundamental, and especially if you're looking at attracting the diaspora. How do you want to be able to grow this opportunity for the Guyanese population and for the people that are out there that can bring a lot more to the table and bring and enrichen the opportunities for Guyanese if it is not easy for them to come back, or if it is not attractive for them to come back. And then finally, and obviously touching my line of business, and that's one of the reasons I'm in it, is education. It is the upskilling of the people. The opportunity has to be for the population, but the opportunity has to be for the people, for the Guyanese people. But for the Guyanese people to be able to take advantage of it, they need to be prepared for it. And I think that is definitely a challenge, and it shouldn't be overseen, and it should be taken highly into consideration, especially for the oil and gas, all the oil and gas opportunities. We're talking about thousands of jobs that aren't jobs for which the Guyanese population has trained itself. So there are millions of new skill sets that need to be learned. There are millions of new types of engineering courses that need to be held. And so I think that is also obviously one of the non-negotiables. It is that the Guyanese people are ready to take in the opportunity and to take advantage of it.
Patricia, I want to come to you. I noted that you raised your hand on something.
Yes, I just wanted to underpin something. I mean, Guyana is a cash society, and as things expand, it can no longer be a cash society. Government is probably already losing millions of dollars in revenue because of lost taxation, etc. And I've been told that there's no interbank linkage mechanism, nor is there. Someone told me it takes a year to get a machine for a credit card machine. If you're a business, it takes a year, and it's either only Visa or MasterCard. There isn't an interchangeable system. So and this is private sector, but of course, the small market size probably means that the banking system does not want to level of investment to digitize and to have the interoperative. But the fact is that the market is coming and the expansion is taking place. And as you say, I remember when I first came back to Jamaica, how frustrated I was because, things move so slowly and I didn't have, everything at my fingertips. But Guyana is worse. So, these little things which are important for the small business and to transform a small business or a micro business into a small business and then to have a thing that really works is very important. And you can't take your eyes of these things which are private sector led, which one needs to make private sector is moving on these opportunities and not just rent seeking. To a large extent, the rent seeking behavior is alive and well in Guyana, and the kind of law when you know things like housing, here's a huge opportunity. You have all these people. Do they all want to live in a big palatial house? No, they want to live in an apartment. But you have no straw house. So there's only a rent market. There are so many little details which are important in making the systems work for the business person to have that opportunity and for a bankable project we put. It's these little things which are critical as factors, and you can't take your eyes off of the details.
Oh, thank you so much. This conversation is just emerging in such rich and diverse ways that I think this, just talking about the details that you just mentioned, would take an entire program in and of itself. But as we approach kind of the end of the conversation, I just wanted to. So
But
what has come up?
can I
Ah,
make a very, very quick comment on
yes, you can.
on the banking? That
Yes.
I don't know how updated Patricia's information is, but this is changing at a very fast pace. That
Yeah.
while at some stage a year ago they might not be in the bank transfer, that has now been corrected. And I am aware, I'm the chairman of Demerara Bank, and I'm aware that in the banking sector there's a rapid move towards digitization. So things are moving very fast, and the need for it is recognized. And I believe the private sector is taking advantage and moving at quite a fast pace. So I just want to make that comment. It is not a situation remaining static. It is coming from a very low level of development, trying to achieve a very high level in a very short period of time. Just want to add that in.
And this is the mathematician in me. This is what appeals to this kind of how to do this in an optimal way that kind of balances the needs of all of the stakeholders in the game is an interesting problem in and of itself. And I think this is one of the rationales, one of the bases of our program and conversation. As we get to the end, I just want to take a bit of a moderator's prerogative. One of the things that has sort of emerged quite a bit in our conversation is this thing around electricity. And so on a personal note, my father passed away on December 31 of this year. So I'm a bit raw. And as I was thinking about, some of the things that he was involved with in his life, one of the critical issues was this issue of electricity. And it was something called the Upper Mazaruni hydroelectric project. And father was a land surveyor. And so I just wanted to share a bit of this, and just as a cautionary tale for what can happen with Guyana if we don't go. So some of the folks who are listening are probably too young to know, but in 1973, there was an election campaign. And in that election campaign, the then Prime Minister of Guyana, Forbes Burnham, kind of campaign manifesto was that his administration would develop a large hydroelectric complex in the Upper Mazaruni River, and it was supposed to provide powering sort of an aluminum smelter that was built at Linden. So the UNDP appointed the World Bank as the consulting firm, and they did a survey, a kind of hydro resource reconnaissance inventory for all of Guyana. And it turned out, as a result of that survey, that the Guyana's total hydroelectric potential was about 7,000 megawatts, spread over many sites, some of which were inaccessible. But the Upper Mazaruni Basin, close to the border with Venezuela, had a capacity of about 3,000 megawatts. And it was identified as the most suitable area for development. And a full-scale feasibility study was carried out in, I think, 1975. But my father worked on this, so I spent lots of time, Linden, Rockstone, Shirimo Crossing, Lion Mountain, the Peruni River, Pataro, all of these places across Guyana where we had this. But what I wanted to draw your attention to was that all of the challenges that emerged, by 1984, the government of Guyana, after spending $1 billion Guyana dollars on various aspects of the project, employment costs, and failure to acquire the international financing, eventually decided not to proceed any longer with it. The point is, electricity has long been this major challenge, a driver for Guyana. And I think we are now at another stage where we're thinking about the gas to energy project, and it has come up in our discussions here. And I really hope that those, as Kamal, you started us off on this kind of history journey, that we think of our history in this regard, and we really don't lose the opportunity that is sitting before us to really make an impact on this front. And so from that personal note, I ask you, David, to say thanks on all behalf and to take us out.
Thank you, Terence. And you will recall some of our early programs last year. One of my pet peeves was there is no reason why by 2025 or so, I was saying, Guyana should not have the most modern, technologically advanced, energy diverse, and efficient utility in the world. Not in the Caribbean, not in Latin, in the world, because you can basically just scratch what you have and build an entire new utility system based on the new technologies, the new fuels, and the fact that you've got this booming economy. But that takes management and implementation, but the opportunity is there. I'd like to just close off thanking everybody for joining us. This has really been stimulating. I'd just like to emphasize my earlier point. This is work in progress transformation. And a little piece of historical data. All this has taken place, and a lot of the leadership in the government is being pushed by a vice president who is a former minister of finance and president of the country, who was trained in Moscow during the years of the USSR. So if that is not a sign of work in progress and change, I do not know what that is, because here is somebody who was educated and trained 1000% opposite to what is being done. And something happened in that work in progress in Guyana in the 1990s and 2000s to have that transformation and now focusing on these new initiatives. And I'm sure Kamal and others can share many other similar stories of people in Guyana who have done that transformation and that adjustment. I think we just need to continue with that. And I appreciate the opportunity to work with Guyana Business Journal, with Terence, and with all of you to continue to push these ideas and this discussion with colleagues in Guyana, in the diaspora, and internationally. So thank you all very much. We look forward to you joining us next month on Wednesday, February 8th, for what would be our 9th Transforming Guyana webinar. And stay in touch via email and electronic systems, and hopefully also in Guyana for the upcoming oil and gas conference on February 14th to the 17th, which will be a major, major event for everybody to watch and to participate. You can attend, but it will also be virtually. So please be aware of that as well.
Thank you all, colleagues. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.